Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 27th of January, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, and I have a team with me today. So I'm delighted to be joined by Debi Evans, by Ben Rubin, and also Diane Rasmussen McAdie, all three speaking to me on link. So we hope that stays stable. Now, we're going to kick off with a video of a local midwife, Victoria Rickson, who spoke to me on Saturday about the reasons why she's no longer a midwife. She's talking about problems within the NHS system. We're going to have a very short video clip with Victoria talking about her experiences. And then we're going to be moving through to things on a global political scale. And we're going to be showing our audience today the connections between our simple NHS and events which are happening on a world scale. But let's start off with that little video interview clip. Just give us some examples of your main concerns around clinical safety or safety for pregnant women who were coming in through the system to give birth to children. What did you see? What did you encounter that you thought this is absolutely wrong?
Safety in transparency. So you're not allowed to truly be transparent to the women. So, you couldn't say things like we're so busy or we're short staffed. So women had this perception that they knew we were busy, but we were having to gaslight them, which never then gave them the bigger picture of, well, my birth was really horrendous, so it must have been me because I didn't speak up enough. But actually, the system stops you guys like understanding the puzzle together. So it was that safety. I was running a caseload of 200 at one point in community. 200. I covered a big area of Plymouth, quite a low social background area. It was a lot of safeguarding. There was a lot of referrals to do, and I just had 15-minute slots every single time I saw a patient. So not only that, you're not looking at their actual overall health, their mental health, domestic violence. I've got to do all that in 15 minutes and check to see if she's healthy with growth chart scanning. You just don't get the chance to actually have a conversation with women. Fast forwarding that, when you go into the hospital, by the time I left, they'd withdrawn most of the community services. So there was hardly any antenatal support. The phones would ring. I actually went in on my day off once to help a brand new preceptee midwife who had a brand new caseload and was left all on her own. She was drowning. And I went in and, the managers are just sat there as if they're just not. And I just sat there the whole day and helped her clean up her caseload. You need to be completely organised or you're going to miss something. And once you miss something, we know what happens. So that was community-based. The hospital-based, you've got women coming in and out of triage. It's like a yo-yo system. They changed the way we do our system, and that wasn't working. And half the midwives were working one way and half were working the other. And then you would miss a dangerous blood pressure or a drug, or it was absolute carnage. And these women are going away and actually saying there's something not right, but they can't put their finger on it. And it's because if you look at any story that's ever come out, where is the midwife story in all this? Completely gagged. We're not allowed to say anything. So it's so enormous, this story. We could talk, you and I could talk every week for an hour and I would never repeat the same thing twice.
Now, Victoria is going to be speaking to us again with a pre-recorded video clip in Extra, talking about some of the actual risks and risk scenarios that she's experienced in the NHS. But the key point is that Victoria is just one of many NHS professionals who've described breakdown in the NHS. And what the UK column has said over a great many years is that breakdown is not accidental. It is planned, it's orchestrated. Now let's move on to the global scenario, one world global government, and a clock is ticking, because this is the real agenda that coming in is a one world government system. This is why Keir Starmer and other politicians are desperate to get to Davos, because that's where it's being built. So I thought we'd take a look inside the clock at the parts of the one world government system, and we can make some comment on it. Now, we've spread a few pieces over your screen here. Let's label them up. A very big part of this mechanism, as we're clearly seeing, is Trump, but we've also got China, we've got Russia there on the stage, and in every cog we see the hand of Israel, which we can have a separate discussion on. But of course, we've also got Keir Starmer involved on the world stage. We've got the European Union. We've got the horrible wars going on worldwide as a result of the policies of these people. And let's bring in the Labour Party, really a shell of its former self. It simply does what it's told. The Labour MPs are the puppets that do what they're told. And probably we can add as well a few little nuts left of the Conservatives, because essentially they have been overwritten and made redundant as a result of powers such as the World Economic Forum here on the left of your screen. So that's a little snapshot inside. And we mustn't forget that the press and media on the UK national stage, on the international stage, and in the United States itself are driving this global political agenda from behind the scenes. So just giving our audience a little bit of a snapshot there, have a think through how we're describing. Let's put a few more parts on screen, and we're going to label these because, of course, the World Health Organization, Davos, the UN, the Bilderbergers, the Trilateral Commission, all of these powerful think tank groups are driving the world's political agenda, and they're affecting not only nation states but blocks of nations, whether it's in South America or it's into Asia or it's into India. This is what the real political system is. And if you think that British politicians elected in this country are making national policy inside the UK, you need to think again, because it's these key parts of the cog. But of course, if a clock is going to work, if it was an old-fashioned watch at least, it needed a mainspring, the force. And what is the force of the political system? We must never forget that nothing moves on a national or international scale without the power of the international bankers. And I've represented the power spring of the watch there. But let's come back to the NHS. And I'm going to bring in the NHS as a tiny part of this world political system. And why do I do this? Well, over the weekend, a paper fell onto my desk. Let's have a look at what it was. It was Weekend, and look at that headline: opening up NHS to private firms will be a key price for a trade deal with Trump. And inside on page 8, it emphasized that actually it was going to be not only with Trump, but Big Pharma was absolutely going to be there in the wings. They want the NHS. And for our audience, I'm going to say, remember what the NHS is, because essentially the NHS is us. It is every part of our life. It is intimate medical details. It can be about us ourselves. It can be about our family. It can be about our children. It can be about babies not yet born. All of this information is held uniquely within the National Health Service. So as a nation, we represent a complete laboratory experiment. And now we're seeing that all of our personal data on a national scale, millions and millions of people, is being offered as some sort of commercial deal with Trump and his fellow globalist pharmaceutical companies. This is terrifying. It is outrageous. It needs to be stopped. And Debi, can I bring you in here, because you also picked up on this? We have been warning about this massive takeover of the NHS for many years, in fact, but particularly, we'll say, over recent years. And now this is coming to fruition. This country is being destroyed, and we are simply guinea pigs for the global pharmaceutical cabal.
Yes, good afternoon, and lovely to be here on a Monday. It's not Friday, it is a Monday. And yeah, the health is big money. And as you've rightly said, the NHS is unique. to the United Kingdom. We have the biggest research database in the world, and we can't get out of the NHS, don't forget. We cannot opt out. We can opt out of sharing our data, but we can't opt out. So, yes, the newspapers have been full of it this week, this weekend. They've been talking about the UK-US trade deal. And what assets do we have? Well, of course, we've got the City of London, we've got academia, we've got the NHS, but more so, we've got us. So let's go back and look at data, because I've been talking about data for ages. And NHS Digital here, public attitudes to data in the NHS and social care. So let's go and look at the graph, because the NHS, of course, is a treasure. It's the treasure to the UK, according to what the media put out, but they are the most trusted organisation, 73%. And then in universities, second most trusted. And then staggering, pharmaceutical companies are third. Do you believe that data? I'm not quite sure. But anyway, let's go to the UK government, where apparently we are going to be taking a leaf out of Make America Great Again. So we're going to try and make Britain great again. But at what cost? So I want to take you to this, the website. It's exactly will be down just for a couple of days. And I'm wondering actually what differences they're going to be making, because we lead the way on life sciences. We've been reporting on this. Ben's been reporting on it for ages. But let's not forget that the NHS was actually created by David Rockefeller and William Beveridge in the Second World War. But now we are the global hub, and this is an industry that's worth 94 billion. So let's go into the opportunity highlights for the UK in this document from UK Gov. So a few statistics, 5,600 life science companies are already operating in the UK, with 25 global pharmaceutical companies already operating in the UK and 30 global medical tech companies. And that accounts for 300,000 are employed in this industry. And we appear to be the UK hub for global talent because of academia. And the UK generated 108.1 billion turnover in the year ending 2022. And pharmaceuticals was responsible for 26.1 billion at the end of 2023. So this is big money. But let's look at the commercial maturity. That might sound a bit gobbledygook, but actually what it means is that the UK's got more biotech products than any other country in Europe. The turnover is 80 billion. We export 30 billion. And of course, the NHS is a major purchaser, and they're looking at our regulatory framework as well. Well, I've got news for the world. It's not fit for purpose. So this is literally, I'm going to be scraping the iceberg here because we are going to talk more about this in extra. So look at the Financial Times headline here. UK studies pricing plan for selling NHS patient data. That's interesting, isn't it? And then when we go back to 2019 and look at what the BBC were reporting, we can see here that Trump is hinting at US companies running the NHS services. Well, we already know that we've got Centene and Priory already in our NHS. But I want to take you back to a little video of, actually, it was Theresa May and Boris Johnson on stage talking about the NHS. I'm hoping we've got the right video. Brian, I'll hand you over for the video.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, this should be the right video. Let's see what happens.
I don't know Jeremy Corbyn, never met him, never spoke to him. He wanted to meet today or tomorrow, and I decided that I would not do that. I think that he is, from where I come from, somewhat of a negative force. I think that people should look to do things correctly as opposed to criticize. I really don't like critics as much as I like and respect people that get things done.
Jeremy Corbyn's office confirmed there had been a request for a working meeting with the President. The President gushed praise at Theresa May and said Brexit would and should happen, even though Theresa May couldn't get her Brexit divorce deal through Parliament.
That deal is teed up. I think that deal is really teed up. I think they have to do something, and perhaps you won't be given the credit that you deserve if they do something, but I think you deserve a lot of credit. I really do. I think you deserve a lot of credit.
Do you agree with your ambassador that the entire economy needs to be on the table in a future trade talk, a trade deal, including the NHS?
I think we're going to have a great trade deal, yes. I think we're going to have a great and very comprehensive trade deal.
With the NHS?
The president didn't quite hear.
Should the NHS be on the table, sir?
I can't hear him. What?
It's the National Health Service. He says, should the National Health Service be on the table?
She probably wished she hadn't helped.
Look, I think everything with the trade deal is on the table. When you're dealing in trade, everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that. But everything will be on the table, absolutely. Okay.
But the point about making trade deals is, of course, that both sides negotiate and come to an agreement about what should or should not be in that trade deal.
Not how he sees it, and it prompted an instant tweet from one of those trying to succeed Theresa May. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, said, "The NHS isn't on the table in trade talks and never will be, not on my watch."
And there you have it. But the NHS is on the table. It very much is on the table. So let's go and have a look at who bankrolled President Trump's campaign. Well, none other than Peter Thiel of Palantir and PayPal. Who else could you say? But it wasn't just Peter Thiel. Who else bankrolled his campaign? Well, it seems as though Pfizer and Big Pharma. And we'll be talking a bit more about this in Extra because they had a cosy little meeting just before Christmas. And I'll be telling you who was at that meeting. But let's go back to data and Palantir. So let's go to the World Economic Forum. There's their page. As we know, Palantir have got connections with Mossad, CIA, DARPA, military contracts, even our own, and I think the Met Police. But again, we'll come back and talk about that in Extra. But crucially, we know that Palantir is embedded in our health system. And here's the page for Palantir. For healthcare, they've got a massive contract to run the NHS Federated Data Platform, a private company in charge of your data. And then we'll go and look at the British Medical Journal, who say that Palantir is really strengthening their hold on the NHS and on NHS patient data. In fact, it's calling it a military company. It says, it's even mentioning there the Ukrainian army. So my question is, have we militarized and weaponized the NHS? Is the NHS the golden egg, do you think, for life sciences and for the UK? And it really brings me back to the NHS app, because this is where all of your data is going, the NHS app. Please consider scrapping the app. And if people are asking you to use apps, just say what I say, which is, I have no access to internet. It quickly closes them down. Over to you, Brian.
Debi, thank you very much for that excellent segment. I'm just going to say, people need to think what is happening here. Our personal data, medical data, us, our parents, our family, our grandchildren, is being sold on the international stage as if it means nothing. This is data for a whole nation. There is no other country in the world that has this level of information. I'll bring you back in 2 seconds, Debi. Basically, this is complete betrayal of the nation. And the wonderful NHS workers, dedicated people who are desperately trying to do their job and can't understand why they see the NHS in such a tragic state of collapse. This is calculated policy by the British government. It's across the Conservatives, it's across the Labour Party, because this is international policy. And we, the nation, the people of UK, are being used as simply assets, animals to be sold on the world stage. Debi, bring you back.
Thanks, Brian. Farmed. And yeah, just one more point. You'll have noticed probably that pharmaceutical companies, their shares have been plummeting, and prices of drugs in America are very high. And the American population don't like the pricing of the drugs. And the NHS, they want cheap drugs. So you can see we'll talk more about it in Extra, but pharmaceutical pricing is also a big deal in all of this.
Debi, thank you very much. We're going to do more on this subject in Extra time, but there's going to be a lot more in the coming days and weeks, because this is absolutely critical. This is a massive attack by our own government on the people in this country. Ben, let's bring you on screen, because, of course, one of the powerhouses in that global governance watch that I started today's news with is the World Economic Forum, and I'm glad that you are still absolutely on their case.
Absolutely on the case, Brian. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Debi, it's lovely to see you. And we're talking about the World Economic Forum, who are committed to improving the state of the world. Brian started by talking about global governance. The World Economic Forum is committed to improving the state of the world. You can read that in two ways, just making things better, or you could be talking about global governance, the state of the world. I think that's what they're doing, does exactly what it says on the tin, the World Economic Forum. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about how global governance drills right the way down to the front line of British politics and our economic system, and give you a few examples of how that has been happening over the last week. The World Economic Forum took place in Davos, started last Monday, and we kicked things off by talking about wealth inequality. All right, so last week I showed you these numbers, this graph, showing the huge increase in wealth inequality in the US over the past 60 years and how it tracks very closely to the founding of the World Economic Forum in 1971, the Global Leader of Tomorrow program, which started in 92, the Young Global Leader program, which started in 2005, the Global Shapers program, which started in 2011. These numbers run up to 2014. And they show a doubling of wealth concentration into the hands of the 1% over 52 years. And if that line carries on going at that same trajectory, we can probably assume that we're looking at about 85 to 90% control by the 1% today. And as we know, they want to drive that up to 100%. We will own nothing and we will be happy. And we think that's probably around 2030, which is a key date for the global 1%, for the World Economic Forum, and for this entire agenda. And crucially, I'm really going to reinforce this point, right? It's not an accident. Yeah, the point of a system is what it does. Posywid, that comes from Stafford Beer. The concentration of wealth into ever fewer hands is the plan. And it's directly linked to the existence of the World Economic Forum and the things that happen there. And this is essentially being delivered through a fascist system. So this is a quote from Mussolini. Fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power. And Benito Mussolini invented fascism. So I'm going to go with his definition over anyone else's. Right now, let's bring that to life a little bit. What does this corporatist system look like? How's it being run? Well, this is what it looks like. Yeah, so this is the World Economic Forum UN Strategic Partnership Framework signing ceremony in June 2019. Right, so the World Economic Forum represents the corporate side of things, the private markets, and the UN represents the state side of that. Right, that's a public-private partnership, and you can see here Bergbrinde, president of the World Economic Forum, a man who makes me ashamed, I'm afraid to say, to be Norwegian. I'm a quarter Norwegian, and he's Norwegian, and that is not good for Norway, that guy being up there. He's alongside Uncle Klaus, founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, very well-known figure. And they're there alongside Antonio Guterres, still currently the Secretary General of the UN, and a lady called Amina Mohammed, who describes herself as Nigerian British. I don't know what that means. British or Nigerian, I think. But anyway, she's Deputy Secretary General of the UN, and she's chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group, crucially, because the Sustainable Development Group oversee the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is the program that is driving the global policy agenda. Right? There are 17 of these. Read them and weep. Or maybe not actually, because they sound quite nice on first examination. So, no poverty, zero hunger, these are all things that we can get behind, right? But the devil, as they say, is in the detail. And behind each of those goals is a global, fascist, public-private marketplace that is designed to accrue power and wealth for the global 1%. That's what these goals are doing. That's how they're being deployed, ultimately. And don't take my word for it. Let's just have a quick look here at a slide from Lisa Witter from Apolitical Foundation, who I've spoken about a lot previously. Apolitical Foundation are currently rethinking the entire purpose and vision of Britain for the UK government. She's also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. And the way that she talks about in her own materials, and provide a link to the video that this comes from, this is how she talks about the SDGs, right? So she says that they are being used to merge the two main global power structures: government on the left-hand side, which is public, and financial markets, as she describes it, on the right-hand side, which is private, and the ring in the center, those are the 17 SDGs. That's what binds those two things together, and that's coming from a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, right? So, and that symbol is incredibly important. If someone's wearing that badge, if you can see someone wearing that badge, or they're stood near it, they're representing that, then ultimately they're the enemy of the 99% of the global population. And importantly, actually, if we just get that back up on the screen, at the bottom there, you can see that climate change is in bold. That's the big grift that's driving everything forward. They want to make everything a climate issue because that's what's driving the SDGs and this huge global public-private marketplace. Now let's get back to Davos and show how that's been deployed at Davos House. And this is the World Economic Forum outpost of Gold's House, which is run by Freud Communications, a UK-based strategic communications consulting firm, a private sector organisation, and this is basically the global propaganda hub for the SDGs. Let's have a little look inside what's going on. It's I've clipped this together from a few of their videos. It's a grand convening, lots of powerful people, business cards being swapped, networking taking place, some of the big beasts of liberal media. So we've got John Chappell there this year, comparing and hosting. James Harding doesn't seem to have made it, actually. He's probably too busy getting his feet under the table at The Guardian. But we had Bad Al Campbell there, who is now a mere podcaster. He's no longer the Iron Fist in Blair's velvet glove, although he probably still is, actually, in the background. And we'll come on to Blair again in a minute. Moira Forbes from the Forbes dynasty. And she's doing a lot around the female agenda, the lady boss stuff, alongside Janet Trencali from EY. And then David Beckham, actually, shaming himself and his nation, and really struggling to pronounce the word philanthropy, actually, which is quite entertaining. And we're going to come back to Beckham at the end of the show. Debbie's got a little video clip that she's going to share with us there. And this is what it's all about, right? So it's dreaming big dreams. It's all very lofty and aspirational and feel good. And the people who walk through the doors, they're presented with this kind of messaging. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of people there probably think that this is a good thing, right? You know, there's a lot of talk of love, and that actually comes from that sign is brought there by the Freud Communications team that comes from their London office. I don't think their definition of love is the same as everyone else's, though. I think this is really just manipulative, a lot of this stuff. This tapestry also comes from the Freud Communications office. I've talked about this a lot on the column over the past 12 months. That is the Walthamstow tapestry by Grayson Perry. Walthamstow is in E17 in London. I think that's a direct reference to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. There's a lot of symbology here. And that basically shows human babies being sacrificed to Satan by the corporations. And I just don't think that's an accident, to be honest with you, right? The fact that that's there and that they have these meetings in front of that tapestry, I think it's just mind-blowing. But anyway, what does that process look like? Well, the public-private partnership. Yeah, so I'll give you just one example here quickly of TikTok and the WHO Foundation, World Health Organization Foundation, talking about Mind Matters, enhancing digital well-being through public-private partnership. Right, so that's TikTok, who is one of the main drivers of mental health problems, particularly in young people, convening a meeting about digital well-being. Yeah, and that's being compared by Jeremy Farrar, who's the chief scientist at the WHO. He was actually at the Wellcome Trust. He was a member of SAGE during COVID, and I actually know someone who used to work in his office when he was at the Wellcome Trust. And he was basically responsible for redirecting the Wellcome Trust, one of the biggest charitable funds in the pharmaceutical sector, by redirecting it towards climate change. And so that agenda was put into Wellcome by him, and he's there leading that out. And again, it doesn't make any sense. It's just massively hypocritical and really just a big PR exercise for corporations, frankly. We also had this year the celebration of 10 years of Project Everyone. And this is the propaganda campaign for the SDGs. They love to kind of separate these things out. This is a UN and a World Economic Forum program, but they rebrand things and they have a different department for this and a different program for that. And that just gives them a sort of basically camouflage. It means that you can't point at it and say, this is that. You know, like it's a way of obscuring what they're doing, essentially. And this is a huge global program. It was founded by Kate Garvey and Gail Galley, who are the two ladies there. who run Project Everyone. They've worked with the Spice Girls, Daniel Craig, Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, this is really about tapping into popular culture, and they're very excited. First of all, because they've done 10 years, and we'll probably do a bigger thing on this, but also because they've just announced some new non-execs, including, really interestingly, this guy, Ravi Guru Murthy, who's the CEO of Nesta, which means that he looks after Nesta and the behavioural insights team. Right, so this is nudge unit stuff, British state assets, essentially, using mind control techniques to drive the SDG agenda. And that was part of the legacy of the first Blair government. So Nesta was a year zero programme put in place by Blair. Kate Garvey was also a key Blair aide. She was actually working directly with him at Downing Street. And of course, Tony Blair was there at Gold's House last week, talking about the clean energy transition. And again, this is another perfect example of a public-private partnership. You've got Tony Blair, exec chairman of his own institute, representing government, representing the state all around the world. And then you have Greg Jackson on the left there, who's the CEO of Octopus Energy. And they co-hosted what they call a high-level roundtable on how we can accelerate the clean energy transition. Yeah. So again, this is all clean energy, climate change, public-private marketplace, huge coalescence of power and money in order to implement this global agenda. And in the room was Jonathan Reynolds, Secretary of State for Business, who's currently UK cabinet member, who was actually at that event. He was there alongside Rachel Reeves. This is another event earlier on that same day in Davos. This was KPMG and the City of London convening a discussion around the transformation of the UK economy, and particularly around inward investment. And obviously the Department of Business and Trade was trumpeting how fantastic all of this was, saying that in just 6 months, the Prime Minister's plan for change has punched through so many of the blockers holding back investment. We've lifted the ban on onshore wind, great for Octopus, obviously. We've launched the most ambitious planning reforms in a generation, also great for Octopus. We've set out plans for our industrial strategy to make the UK a leading destination for growth. And we hosted the International Investment Summit, where we secured a record-breaking £63 billion of inward international investment, which is essentially asset stripping by people who go to Davos, for example, of UK national assets. And Octopus, as I've kind of touched on a few times, has done very well out of this kind of program. And we can see here from Cornwall Insight that Octopus Energy has just become the GB's, Great Britain's largest household supplier of energy. They've overtaken British Gas. They now serve 12.9 million household energy accounts with a 23% market share. Cornwall Insight say that Octopus Energy started from zero market share in 2015 and has worked his way up to the top spot on this measure in less than a decade, which is extremely striking given that this is a highly regulated market. So it seems like they've really been getting a helping hand from the political classes here. And also, interestingly, 2015 was the year that the SDGs were first introduced. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. And all of that has been driving that line up towards the top right-hand side, delivering more money and more power into the hands of the 1%.
Ben, thank you very much for excellent analysis there. And I'm going to look our audience in the eyes today and say, well, of course, none of us really knew this was going on many years ago, but now we do know it's going on. Why is it still happening? Because we are not challenging it through the systems that we have. When people say to me, it's pointless talking to your MP, I say no, because we still have a parliament. The fact parliament isn't working is because we are allowing it to get away with this nonsense. So if you are outraged by what we've shown you today and you want to do something about it, the time has come that in each constituent, see people pin their MPs to the wall in the nicest possible way in order to make them aware of what's happening and the fact that you, as a constituent, do not want this global governance. It's up to us. It's not for somebody else to do it. Let's move on, and we'll say to the audience a big thank you for everybody who's supporting the UK column. If you're not a member, then please do become a member and support us. You can make a donation or join us on a monthly membership or an annual membership or a lifetime membership, as some people like to do. we can only do what we do with your financial support. You can, of course, make a purchase from the shop, also make a purchase from the shop. And we like to point out that we do provide Clive de Carle's health products, and we receive a small commission on sales for that. So that may be something of interest to you, but we can only run the UK column with the financial support of our audience. We do what we do for you to be able to share information. We're pushing out on as many other platforms as we can, but of course YouTube has still got us blocked. Facebook is a little bit iffy as well, so we rely on our audience, our viewers, our listeners to help us share this material wherever they can. Now, tomorrow at 1 p.m, interview is going out. This is Charles Mallet interviewing Catherine Gunn, and Catherine's telling the extraordinary and timeless events surrounding her arrest under the Official Secrets Act, whilst a highly dubious case was made for war with Iraq. So in many ways, not a lot has changed with what's going on in the Middle East and Ukraine, but I encourage you to watch that interview. Excuse me, Diane, I think this is one for you. Welcome to the news.
Yes, thanks, Brian. And hello, Ben and Debbie, full house today. So I just wanted to mention again that I've been mentioning the last few weeks, the Scottish People's COVID-19 inquiry tickets are still available for this. They're £25 per person, including lunch, coffee, tea, etc., with a number of really good speakers. And I will be speaking, among the other speakers, about, in my particular case, about the propaganda that has led up to 2019 and 2020 and kind of what happened and how that sort of drove the narrative of what the government did in the UK and around the world during the COVID period. And related to this as well, there's a podcast that just came out over the weekend, which is the next slide. Professor Richard Innes, who is the chair of Common Knowledge Edinburgh, which I am also a member of the executive committee, and we are the ones organizing this conference. And he spoke to Craig Houston over the weekend about the conference and about what he has seen so far in the evidence that's come out of the government COVID inquiry, which, by the way, has cost £25 million and counting. So please watch that podcast and join us on the 22nd of February at the conference if you are in Scotland.
Diane, thank you very much for that. Now, before I put your first slide up on screen, I just wanted to say I was outraged when I saw the BBC using Burns Night as an opportunity to promote the fact that King Charles was visiting Auschwitz. So the Burns celebration completely pushed into a different arena, dark, depressing stuff. If that wasn't bad enough, I think your first slide takes the biscuit.
It certainly does, Brian. I was actually spending Burns Night hearing Burns poetry and listening to Scottish music, as we should be in Scotland. However, Keir Starmer decided to celebrate it with a drag queen at 10 Downing Street. So this is a former winner of RuPaul's Drag Race, apparently, who was there dressed up in all kinds of makeup and Scottish... you can't call it a kilt. I don't know if you can call it a kilt if the person is actually trying to be a woman. I don't know what you call that, but wearing tartan and too much makeup, celebrating with Keir Starmer. Can't make it up.
No, and I'm not going to comment further because, well, let's just move on. It's outrageous.
It absolutely is. So I want to back up a little bit. We're going to come back to Sir Keir Starmer in just a minute, but I want to relate this to Trump and kind of how the special relationship between the US and the UK is unfolding and what this means and who's been informing the policies that are coming in. So a lot of people will know that the first week in office for Trump was a busy week in terms of executive orders. He signed a total of 64. I've read them all, so you don't have to. Most of them cover a range of topics like healthcare, stopping illegal immigration, deporting people who are in the U.S. illegally, energy policy, ending gender ideology, which Keir Starmer is clearly not going to be happy about, the practice of hiring employees based on DEI initiatives, these things like this. But I want to talk about what executive orders are first, because it's really important to understand what's happening and to make sure that we don't have a constitutional crisis happening. An executive order can be signed by the president because presidents have what's called executive power. As we know, they are the head of the executive branch. These are supposed to be limited to how the government operates, the federal government. They don't have anything to do with what individual states can do. They don't have anything to do with corporations and how they work necessarily. And they can't make laws that affect the entire country. That's the job of Congress. And this is according to the Constitution. That Article 1 says the Congress makes the laws, and Article 2 says that the president has the executive power. And of course, he can make decisions about how the federal government is run, but he can't make laws. So one of the things that's been happening already in these first few days is there are certain states that are primarily majority Democrat states that are talking about some of these executive orders potentially being unconstitutional. And we have to look at this a little bit more to see what they're doing. So one, for example, that has been challenged, or at least has been looking at certain judges in Washington, Arizona, Illinois, and Oregon so far, so for Democratic states, is the birthright for children of illegal immigrants. And this goes back to Trump's executive order around the fact that he's now saying that traditionally, and this is according to the Constitution, that anyone born within the United States is automatically an American citizen. But he's decided through his executive order that this is no longer going to be the case, that if you are the child of an illegal immigrant, you don't get that birthright. This is being questioned. Also, as well, related to some of the executive orders, one of them has been to deport migrants that are there illegally. And so they've been trying to send people back to countries such as Colombia. And this was something that happened just this morning. Was announced that the U.S. will not go ahead with the tariffs that they were placing on Colombia after Bogota, the capital of Colombia, agreed to accept without restrictions the deported migrants, because they were going to say, we're not taking the migrants back. But now that Trump had ordered tariffs and they've now agreed to accept the tariffs will not be placed on them if they take the migrants back. So we're seeing financial transactions related to actual people, right? So now that we've talked a little bit about Burns Night and what Keir was doing the last few days, there's been some discussion back and forth between Trump and Keir Starmer. Trump said on Saturday on Air Force One, he told the BBC and other reporters that so far he thinks that Sir Keir Starmer has done a quote, very good job. And he says that they get along well, despite Keir being liberal. But overall, Trump says he thinks he's a very good person. Let's go back to looking at what happened on 2016. I believe we have a video of Keir Starmer talking about his thoughts on Donald Trump, and this was in relation to petitions that were signed where the people in the UK in January 2016 were saying that they wanted to exclude Donald Trump from entering the UK.
Of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner to express his views. I do agree with others that we should invite him to join us in our various constituencies and meet our constituents and members of various religious orders and faiths and communities. Actually, listening this afternoon, if he came here, is obviously going to be really busy because he's going to several constituencies already. I would obviously invite him to mine, let's say end of a long list, to meet members of my constituency, because it is an incredibly diverse, multicultural community. And Donald Trump would see a UK very different to the picture that he painted. But should he be banned from entering the country on the basis of what he said? No, in my view, he shouldn't. He should be met with words far more powerful than his own. I do accept that this is a judgment call. And I respect those, not only this afternoon, but on other occasions, who have expressed the contrary view that this is so close to the line that Donald Trump should, in fact, have action taken against him. But in the end, we should be guided by our own values and not those of Donald Trump. And our own values include a deep belief in freedom of speech and a deep belief in multi-faith and diverse societies where everyone feels secure and everyone feels respected.
So I see just a bit of hypocrisy there, considering what's been happening to free speech in the UK recently. Let's see what he said in October of 2024. In 2016, he said he wouldn't have Trump over for dinner. But what did he say in October last year?
Donald Trump, how was he? It was a really good meeting. We had dinner together.
You have a burger? Or steak? Doesn't he have steak?
He didn't have
meal?
steak on that occasion. He had chicken. He flew up from Florida, and we both wanted to ensure that we have a good relationship. That was the purpose of the dinner. And
did he feel like a man you could do business with if he was to win?
Look, of course, because it's up to the American people to choose who they want as their president. And it's up to me as Prime Minister to make sure I have a good relationship with whoever the president is. A special relationship that we do have between our two countries sits above whoever the post holder is at any given time. Mm-hmm. And it's in my nature. I believe strongly in personal relations.
So he wouldn't have dinner with Trump 8 years ago, but now they had a great time having chicken together. So who knows what actually happened? And that ties into my questions around what has been driving all the executive orders, what has been driving his policy agenda coming into the presidency again. A lot of people talk about Project 2025, which I covered previously in November, which is really from a think tank called the Heritage Foundation. Let's see what Trump has said about Project 2025. And this was during the campaign. I think we have one more clip showing that.
Sorry, I think you're after this one, Diane.
Okay, yeah, no, that's...
For the former president, he's now distancing himself from the controversial Project 2025. That's a massive proposed overhaul of the federal government, which includes firing tens of thousands of government workers and replacing them with Trump loyalists. It also calls for cutting Social Security benefits. It was drafted by longtime allies and former officials in Trump's administration. Trump posted on his social media website that he knows nothing about it and has no idea who's behind it. This comes days after the head of the think tank responsible for the program suggesting there would be a second American Revolution.
So we don't really know for sure the connections between Project 2025, Keir Starmer, Trump, and how all these things are being determined. What we do know is that there has been a trade agreement that has been discussed and agreed upon. For starters, going back to last year, we have a trade agreement between the UK and 8 separate U.S. states, including some of the largest states in the country. The biggest one, Texas, having basically the value of $2.6 billion in GDP. So a lot of the GDPs of individual U.S. states are bigger than many countries, for a total of $7 billion worth of trade and so on between those two states. Project 2025 has some recommendations in terms of policy that we've asked questions about. And it wrote this Mandate for Leadership, which is a 900-page document that outlines what they think the president should be doing. And they do this for every president, have done this for decades now. So this is not new to Trump. But basically, they've outlined what they think should happen. And what I was looking at is how some of these executive orders and some of his policy decisions so far that he hopes to have put into place are related to Project 2025. So their policy recommendations, including securing the border, unleashing American energy, de-weaponizing the federal government, and dismantling the deep state. I hope that happens, but that includes eliminating woke propaganda, improving education, and what Trump is hoping to do there is dismantle the Department of Education and put the control back to individual states about how things are going. So what we're seeing really is we're seeing that some things are happening that was recommended by Project 2025, but not exactly. There's a lot of detail about the trade figures that you can read in the show notes, but just to say that we're not really sure where these things are coming from. And I'm also really not sure what's going to happen between the so-called relationship, because Keir never says the same thing twice in a row. So I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know what you think, Brian.
I think the key thing, Diane, is that people should really be thinking about this and analysing what's happening. There are too many people, in my opinion, ready to jump on the bandwagon that Trump is going to be the saviour of not only UK, but the Western Hemisphere. But actually, if we look at what he's doing, it's very difficult to actually see what he's putting together. He's doing some policies that are drawing many people, millions of people to him. But with the other hand, he's clearly engaging engaging with this global corporate one world system of government that we're warning about. In my mind, I see lots of similarities with Nigel Farage, who encouraged people to come to UKIP. He waved the flag, he led them on, and then just at the critical moment when they were winning votes, he abandoned the party. So I'm somebody at the moment who's watching very carefully what Trump is doing, but I'm certainly not thinking that he's the saviour of everything. And Ben, let's bring you back on and tell us a bit more about Trump and Davos.
Indeed, I would have to echo your sentiments, Brian. He's very clearly coordinating with the globalist system, and he talks about them as his friends, ultimately. He was there at Davos virtually, so he wasn't there in person. It was only a few days after the inauguration. You can see him up on screen there. We're not going to show the speech or any clips from it because I think it's worth going to watch it yourself, actually. His initial remarks are about 15 minutes long, and then there's a Q&A of about half an hour. Well, there'll be a link in the show notes. You should go and watch it. What we will show very quickly, though, is the introduction from Klaus Schwab, and then I'm going to make a few comments about what I heard from Trump.
As you might expect, Mr. President, your return to office and your forthcoming policies have been at the focus of our discussions this week. The discussions among 3,000 political and business leaders from over 130 countries who came together here in Davos. We look forward hearing first from you and then to the follow-up discussion with business leaders moderated by my colleague Børge Brende. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump.
So as I say, we won't show the speech, but you should go and watch it. But a few comments from me on it. It was... he's got an enormous amount of energy. I've got to say, Trump was actually very impressive. For a 78-year-old man, he was concise and insightful and really did a great job at delivering his agenda. The positives were, he talked about this revolution of common sense, which I think we could all do with a big dose of. He's going to be closing the border and protecting and putting an end to illegal immigration. That's certainly what he's talking about, and I think that's an absolutely sensible thing for him to do, best for the US, and we should be looking to emulate that in this country as well. He talked a lot about protecting free speech, getting rid of censorship, getting rid of DEI. He talked about moving back to being a merit-based country, and he repeated that, right? And I think that's really important. He announced a national energy emergency, promoted oil and clean coal as he talked about it. And I think really importantly, he talked a lot about pursuing peace efforts in Ukraine. I know that this will resonate with you, Brian, right? And he talked about millions dead, nothing like it since World War II. He mentioned that twice. And it actually came across as quite genuine, to be honest with you. And he mentioned talks of denuclearization talks between Putin and Xi. And there were some good things in there, right? There certainly were, right? But there were definitely some negatives as well. And for me, as Brian kind of touched on, essentially what you're seeing here is Trump beginning to coordinate with the globalist system. He talked about the fact that the audience is fantastic. Many of my friends are in the audience. That's a phrase that he repeated a couple of times, right? He's very friendly with these people. And that includes people like Steve Schwarzman, who's the CEO of Blackstone, who's actually a neighbor of Trump's in Florida. And Trump says he's a fantastic businessman. He's an asset stripper, right? That's what Schwarzman is. And unfortunately, these are Trump's people. He talked a lot about protectionist trade policies, using tariffs to make trade better for America, but less good for everyone else. Now, I don't think that America should be paying the world necessarily. There definitely needs to be a rebalancing, but I also don't think that the opposite should be true. I think that there needs to be a fair system, not one that just primarily benefits America. He talked a lot about defending Google and Meta against the EU in particular. And these are basically military intelligence assets. They're global spying platforms and they're bad for humanity. not just the American people, but they very much appear to be on side with Trump, as we saw at the inauguration last week. And also, really crucially, and this is the absolute kicker for me, is that he was, again, bigging up this $500 billion investment into Project Stargate, which basically, for me, is the Stasi and the Gestapo and the gulags and the concentration camps all rolled into one, delivered by a public-private partnership of SoftBank, Oracle, and OpenAI, and that is bad for everyone. So we'll see how it goes.
We certainly will. Thank you, Ben. Diane, let's bring you back on. And, well, the global elite believe that they've sorted Earth out and we're all happy and well-fed and watered, so they're moving on to Mars. Or have I got it wrong?
No, well, Mars and who knows, beyond Mars, who knows what's next. But yeah, so there was an obsession at Davos last week called Thriving in Orbit. And it said that by 2035, the space economy is set to reach $1.8 trillion, up from $630 billion in 2023, and averaging a growth rate of 9% a year. And so I've got a couple of the speakers that I just pulled from this panel. One is Davin Newman, who is a former NASA astronaut, aerospace engineer. She's a director of the MIT Media Lab. And we've got Zachary Bogue, who's a managing partner and co-founder of something called DCVC, which is some sort of entrepreneurial organization. So let's hear a little bit about what they had to say about space.
We're also just seeing a thawing of the IPO market as well. So I think that there will be increasing number of companies that are able to make it public, which is terrific for sort of the commercialization of space.
Thanks. And Dava, I'm going to ask you the Trump question. Do you think Trump is a romantic or a pragmatist? What impact do you think he's going to have on the space industry and some of the either financing or innovations? Do you think it's going to make any difference having Trump as president?
Well, moving in to a new administration in the U.S., again, the public-private partnerships, this is consistency of purpose is how NASA and even space with allowing how it works in the U.S. and globally. It's not just the U.S. I think it's globally. So when it comes to scientific missions and technology and more government seed funds to large funding, I hope that there will be some consistency of purpose. It's going to be chaotic for sure. New opportunities to push forward, to accelerate. Some of the investments, especially with the new, not approved, but NASA Select. I think we'll be very focused on acceleration and hopefully still public-private partnerships. So hopefully there's still partnerships, but there's going to be focus on acceleration for commercial. That's great.
Now, I don't really know what she was talking about there, but there's something to do with space and acceleration and public-private partnerships, and I think that's the most important thing, is that there's going to be a lot of money and a lot of cooperation around the world right? The whole panel is like that. And so the thing is that what I want to talk about here is how these public-private partnerships, as well as the elite organizations, are coming into play. I'm not sure if everyone is aware of, for example, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. They do have a section on their website that is called Moon, Mars, and Beyond, which we've got here on the screen. Yep, there we go. We had a UN conference on sustainable lunar activities, which took place last year. And we can see also as well that actually today, Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, is launching more satellites for his Starlink company, which he said is meant to be for internet access around the world, in places that normally couldn't get good internet access, is what he keeps saying. But they keep launching more and more of these, and this is going to be launched from Cape Canaveral Space Station in Florida. So again, we see NASA collaborating with Elon Musk and SpaceX. We also know that King Charles has launched the Astrocarta. That's been around since 2023, where he's talking in particular in the Astrocarta about moving from the Earth to the stars, which builds on the foundation of Terracotta, to shape a future of responsible and sustainable space exploration. So we're going to be out in space, and we're going to be following the Sustainable Development Goals all at the same time, obviously incredibly important. But we know that Trump has been talking about Mars, and just as a reminder, here's what happened during his inauguration speech last week.
We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
Elon Musk be incredibly excited about that little bit of information that he's announced. If you want to see the details of the rocket launch for SpaceX and for Starlink, that is happening later today. I'm sure there's different broadcasts you can watch if you really want to see more of these go into space. I think it's interesting to note that his ultimate goal with these satellites is to get internet access on Mars, so that, and you can read this, that you can be connected to the internet once we have Mars colonized. But not everyone is entirely as optimistic about life on Mars as Elon Musk is. Doesn't matter how much money you have. This is an article I found on a website called Futurism. It was a husband and wife couple that are scientists that wrote a book, and this was from last year, saying his plans for a city on Mars will likely end in horrifying mass death. They go into the realities of whether or not Mars can sustain human life based on radioactivity, based on what that would do to hormones and everything else about our ability to thrive as healthy people. So we'll have to see what happens next, but that's the plan according to Elon Musk and Trump.
Diane, in my mind, these people are mad. We have a world riddled with famine and suffering and poverty, which they've largely created. And rather than dealing with that, they're off onto their next thing, which is commercializing space and going to Mars. So they think it's quite incredible. But of course, the message for ordinary people is rather similar to Keir Starmer's Christmas speech, where he quickly got speaking about football, because that's what the average person really understands and puts top of the tree. So, Debi, let's bring you back in, because somebody's been talking.
Oh, yes. Well, and finally, I thought it would be great to tie up Diane's references to the King and Ben's great reports on Davos. And this is a bit of a trigger warning. If you're having lunch, you might feel a bit sick. But David Beckham was awarded the Crystal Award at the WEF last week for his humanitarian work. And, Pearl, how desperate do you have to be for a knighthood? Have a look at this.
Yeah, for good. You also participate in the King's Fund. Is that something more recent? What's your relationship?
Yeah, I always get emotional talking about anything that I do with our royal family, because I've always been a huge royalist. I was brought up in a family, in a household that adored and loved everything that came with the royal family. So, over the years, I've done a lot with the Prince of Wales, and I've always been there whenever he's asked me to get involved with things, whether it be veterans, whether it be the London Air Ambulance Service, which we raised funds to get 2 new helicopters for London. These are the things that when I was a kid, I used to see the helicopters going over, and you knew exactly what they were going to do. They were on the way to an emergency. So to be involved in that has always been a yes for me. Whenever the Prince of Wales sends me a message and says, I need you to do this or be there, it's always a yes. So when the King asked me to be part of his foundation, I was very honoured, very privileged. I rang my mum straight away and said, you're not going to believe what I've just been asked to do.
What did she say?
My mum always just bursts into tears, in all honesty, because she's so proud of obviously what I've done throughout my career, but she's also proud, and she knows my grandparents would have been proud that I've played such an important role within the royal family and the charities that they have. So to be involved in the King's Foundation, our King is an incredible man. He's an incredible man, but he's not just been an incredible man for the last 5-10 years. He's been an incredible man for decades. The work that he has done to empower young people, the grassroots work, all of those, sustainable work, all of these things, all of those lost arts that are lost, and he's trying to bring them back. I visited recently, I visited him, and there's a couple of great pictures that I've had of me laughing with him, and best friends apparently.
Best friends. There you go, Brian. Over to you.
I think the word is besties, isn't it? They're besties, bestie friends. But he's talking about the king who's working behind the nation's back to bring in the globalist agenda that we've just described in our news today. So utterly, utterly despicable, but it's up to people in this nation to take up the baton and challenge what's happening through every lawful, peaceful means they have. Because it's up to us to make the change. There isn't going to be a knight in shining armour coming forward to solve all of the problems. And in my opinion, it's certainly not going to be Trump, but we will see. We'll leave it there. If you're a member of UK Column, do join us for Extra. We're going to have a very important Extra today talking about the NHS and more on what's happening amongst this global system. So join us there. That's the end of today's news. Thank you to the audience wherever you are in the world watching us. We'll be back for another UK Column news on Wednesday. Don't forget the interview going out at 1 o'clock tomorrow. That's it. Thank you all for joining me. Bye-bye.